I thought we'd just pick up where we left it. And we're working on this idea that color could be represented by a set of mini columns that are independent of, say, the edges, right? So the color blobs. And I was reading more about color blobs, but I'm going to correct myself. The thing I remember is color is mostly considered to be processed in V4 with stripes in V2, but the blobs are in V1. So I was remembering the fact that they say color is not really processed or understood until V4, and I was mistaken.
So when they say processed,
I know.
what do they?
I just read it again.
Okay.
I'm saying this is where we believe. I didn't have time to read it. Then I read I was just while you were in here with John Chen, I read a paper by Catherine Rockham, and who's well known in particle anatomy, and this is about blobs and look extremely low level details about all these minute differences in structure within structure, and it's like really mind boggling. So I can't make any sense of it, but it's not like blobs. Her point is blobs aren't just these blobs. There's all this substructure, more structure, interconnected. I'm like, but no explanation what any of it means.
It's also a very creative name.
What?
Blob.
An interblob.
There's a blob.
And the thing that's not in the blob is the interblob.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, and then those, remember we were looking at the big green color blob in layer 3, and then there's other, whether red or whatever the other word, those are just more examples of, like, as I was looking at, okay, there's like little bloblets in layer 4, but there's bigger blobs in layer 3. Maybe they're all doing the same thing in a sense, in the following way that we started talking about, but here. So I was just thinking about, here's a picture. Actually, I should draw this like this. So this is kind of the basic model working on this. That we have two reference frames. They're both driven by the same motor behavior, so they're actually in sync most of the time. That may talk about that a bit. And we're going to assign one of those reference frames for behaviors and one of the reference frames for we're changing things and static things. So one to be static objects and one to behavior, modeling behaviors and modeling structure. So structure versus behavior, structure versus change. And then we were just last week and earlier we said, okay, this is really cool because we have these edges, these mini columns that represent edges. And those mini columns then would represent, this would be the morphology of the object. And if those edges are moving, then it would be the change in the morphology of the object. And we could basically learn stick figures dancing or doing whatever, staplers. It doesn't really matter what the color is. It's just about edges moving. And that's cool. But then we didn't have the color thing. So then we said, well, the next idea was, well, what if we represent another set of mini columns with color? And again, these representations, you'll see it. These representations have to be, the representations have to be in mini columns. Meaning, like, to represent orientation, I have to say this mini column is this orientation, this mini column is this orientation, so on. It's like there's not a lot of them. That's the point of it. You're a limited number. It's the output of the spatial pooler. It's k winners of a small number. And so we have to do the same thing with color. We'd have to represent color as a set of mini columns where I don't have to say each color has to represent, each mini column has to represent a particular color, but I have to be able to represent my color spectrum with a set of mini columns. And then the idea here would be, okay, well, what would you learn here? This would learn, if I just looked at, imagine now this reference frame applies to all these upper layers. So we have a bigger reference frame. All these guys can look at the bigger reference frame. Or you could argue that this repetitiveness is in the reference frame. So that would work too. Here we'd say, okay, it's like, on a particular object I'm learning, like a particular stapler, if there's a color, I could assign that color to the stapler. If the color of the stapler changed at any point in time, not by location, but over time, then that would be captured here, and that would then be fed into your behavioral reference frame. Along with anything else that might be changing. Maybe it's just colors that are changing. So if the whole thing changes from red to green to red to green, it would learn that. But if it was associated with particular locations on the traffic light, well, then it would be associated here with particular locations on the traffic light. You'd be learning red to green, red to green. And then I said, well, this is a general purpose idea. You can have any attribute as long as you're represented by a set of mini-columns. And you had a static and a changing version of that. Well, then you could learn some other attributes, change of color or change of, I don't know, just what are these things we're saying here? Just stuff. And then it made me wonder, and that would work. I think then you could basically say you kind of mix and match here. Like any one of these things could be enough to infer the correct behavior, right? It could be a combination of movement and color change, or just color change, or just movement, or something else that makes a sound, whatever it is we got to represent here. Anything in this sort of column here. Of course, on the original object, we might have assignments of these things to the static reference frame. I haven't worked it out further than this, but the point I'm trying to get to is that I could learn the behavior of an object using a combination of attributes that seem to be important. If the color changes as it goes, and that seems to correlate to the other changes, then that would be part of the behavior of the object. Maybe the color changing would be independent of the morphology changes. So this thing changes from red to green every 3 seconds, independent of whether I open the stapler or close it, or something like that. So we learned those as two separate behaviors. And then somehow we want to be able to say, okay, on a new object, maybe I recognize a new object by morphology, and I see the actual color of the object, but there's no changes in the color object. It's somehow this has to lead to my prediction here, right? It's because color is not tied to the particular location. It's just tied to this section on the object is not changing. Therefore, if I open the stapler, there'd be no reason to this would have to be persistent, right? You have to say if it was red, it's going to stay red, something like that. Or if it was if I'm looking at some place and there's an edge here and the color changes, well, I'm just going to assume this is the same, something like that. So I haven't worked through all the details, but it seems like you could transfer anything that's not changing. You would just assume it's constant because you didn't record a change there as part of this behavior of a behavior. Or if the color changed at different locations, that's not a behavior. Then I recognize another object, I might assume the same color change on the new object, something like that, right? I mean, not change the color. Like if the top of the stapler is always blue, then and I see a new stapler has the same morphology. I see it's a stapler, then I would say, oh, stapler. These locations of the stapler are always blue, or something like that. I haven't worked through this all. I'm just trying to test the ideas.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like what I was suggesting, but
It is. I'm developing it.
So did something change in what you were thinking how neurons could be doing this, or?
What's the new thing for me today is the idea that I have to segregate the mini columns into these different attributes.
Yeah.
Up to now, when we always thought about column, I always thought somehow like the color or these other attributes would be integrated into the same layer 4 as the edges. It was like, I felt like an object has some morphology, and then we put on top of it, we put some other attributes. This is saying objects, actually, this isn't even, the edges isn't even preferential here. It's just another type of attribute.
So how does this help with the problem that the color needs to stay the same as the stapler moves through different locations?
It doesn't yet solve the problem of how do I even know predicting where the stapler on top will be. But it does solve the problem, I believe, of color constancy or color changing.
Because it's a separate column, not just a.
Right. I have a model of colors for this object. So in some sense, I could have a static object with color changing colors, or I could have a changing morphology object with static colors. They're separate models. This is a color model of the object, and this is a edge model of the object, and this is the other attribute models of that object. And we've already had this idea in some sense like combining like the sound of an object or the touch of the object through the feel of an object, the vision of an object, like what it look like with touch. But those, I always think those are in separate areas, right? Those different parts of the brain. This is all, this is right here, we're still in one column here. This is one sensor patch at one location, sensing different things.
Yeah, so basically having a color in their own columns makes it possible for us to keep it constant.
Right, because the color part of this model dictates how colors change or don't change. The edge part of the model tells us how the edges move or don't move, morphology. And whatever other attributes we want to throw in there would do the same. And the nice thing about this is the next step is to say this is nothing special. This happens to be what we see at low-level visual and somatosensory regions. But elsewhere in the cortex, I may have nothing like that, right? It frees my mind from thinking like, what's the morphology of concept spaces? I don't have to think about that. I just have to think about there's a bunch of attributes that are changing. And this is a big difference in my mind, right? Divorcing things that we thought we had to have in every model, like morphology and edges or something like that. And to say, no, that's just convenient down here in V1 and S1. But it may mean nothing in higher, it's just a different set of attributes that
Yeah, I feel like it's quite a switch in thinking in the sense that before we talked about features and morphology being treated very differently. But
Right.
now they are all mini columns.
right,
They are separate mini columns, but they are all,
right.
yeah,
So this is like what our old stuff is a subset of the broader superset of how a column works. And when we think about primary sensory cortices, especially vision and cortex, it's hard to, I mean, vision touch, it's hard to avoid these edges as a feature, right? It's just hard to avoid them. There is, I already have a problem with this, so I like this. And then while you were in your meeting with John, I had I think, potential problem. I was trying to imagine, and this is the one you brought up earlier, changes in orientation. Like, what if I have a feature, like a little logo or something, and it just rotates? So it's a compositional object, where I say, oh, here's a feature at this location. But the thing that changes in the behavior is it changes its orientation. So then you can imagine opening the stapler and there's a little logo on the side. As you open the stapler, the logo spins around or something like that, right? That's kind of cool. But easy to remember. I could easily see that. I have no trouble learning that. Or maybe it points up or points to the left. I don't know what it is, but so I was trying to, just before we came back in, I was trying to figure out, well, how does orientation play into this? Like, changes in orientation are part of the model. I need to be able to represent that.
could that be done in a similar way as we do with like normal changes in orientation of an object, that basically the change model, the behavior model encodes changes in orientation, and then those
Right.
get sent up.
Well, so this is where it gets confusing. I said, okay, why don't we just add some more mini columns here? And these represent orientation. And then I can say, okay, well, there's some orientation coming in for some feature. And if that orientation changes and the feature doesn't change, then I would encode that here. But now
Then you would have to send that orientation to the thalamus and make it orient the.
something like that. But and then it got really complicated because this orientation applies to child objects. And I was thinking that's what this was applying to. I thought, oh, this is going to be, originally I said, oh, this is the orientation, and the child object was going to be just like colors. That's going to be like somehow I'm infused into layer 4, right? I have these orientation columns, and somehow the child would be some sparse representation which dictates the layer 4 cells. But it doesn't work anymore. If I do this, that doesn't work anymore. So it's just, I'm not saying there's no, it's a big problem. I'm just saying I'm confused at this point in time, as of like an hour ago. Like, do I have a separate mini column for orientation? I thought that's what these were. Or is it the following? Is it like, if I say the logo is at a certain orientation, is it, this is the orientation and the logo's here? separate mini columns for a logo. And by the way, as a child object, the child object can be so many, you can't represent them in mini columns. I can't take a child input and say, oh, that's a new simple attribute. Let's represent it in 20 mini columns. That's not possible. There could be millions of children objects or thousands of them. So I can't represent, I can't take a child input and say, oh, that's just an attribute at this location. It seems like I have to do something else beyond that.
Wouldn't it be just a projection of the temporally pulled representation in the lower level?
Yeah, but where do I store it here? Where am I gonna, I want to be able to say there's a child object at some location. I know how to do that. Well, I know that I'm sending the representation for the child in SDR, and I can calculate the orientation in the thalamus, the relative orientation. And so the information is coming in. And my assumption all along was that, oh, I'm just going to use that to dictate which cells are active in the oriented mini columns. Like this was the orientation of the child object. And but I can't do that anymore. I can't do that here. This is just morphology. This doesn't, I can't add into the, right? I'm changing the orientation of a specific object. It's,
I'm a bit confused. Did you mean to draw these the other way around? Because here it's changing and there's static, but then.
oh yes, I did. I did that wrong. Yeah. That was the only one that was. These I didn't specify. So it could be. These are tied together.
I guess one thing that's a bit different in this like static edges view is in, at least in Monty or in general, it seems like you don't need to store all these different edges. You would just need to learn a model of one edge and then have corresponding orientations of that edge that you apply to that one edge.
What do you mean applied to it? Oh, what you're saying, like the feature is the edge and these are the only.
Yeah, the edge is the feature, and then it can occur in different orientations.
Right, I thought about that here. Maybe we're still working, so I was having trouble making, for a while I adopted the idea, but now I'm struggling with it.
And then whatever's encoded in the behavior model would be translations and orientations that are being perceived. And
But we're
translation and
mixing
orientation.
things up. There's mini columns that I see that represent angled edges.
Yeah, that's the.
Is that a universal orientation or is that a feature at that angle?
I'm not sure why we're seeing that in the brain. I'm just saying from a algorithmic level, you would just need to store one edge and then be able to rotate it to whatever orientation.
Oh, okay, let's say that. That's what I adopted in this little picture here. In some sense, I'm saying that your feature is an edge and we're showing it different orientations. I think I took.
Yeah, and
Right.
basically you wouldn't need to learn
But
it.
how do I now apply that to the logo child object?
Yeah, so basically the behavioral model would just include translations and orientation, and then you can apply translation orientation to any kind of feature. It could be an edge, or it could be a curve, or it could be.
Okay, so let's say we just, the
The
behavioral model
logo.
applies that. Right at the moment, we have my mental models, I have a set of cells that represent the location in space. I have another set of cells, layer 6B, that represents the orientation. So I have two different, in some sense, reference frames, right? I didn't show the other one here. 6A and 6B is, the idea is that would be locations and directions, orientation. And both of those are path integratable, by the way. Motion can change the orientation of something, and motion can change your location. But I don't know what to do with that. So let's continue that here. So this is my static reference frame. This would be 6A, this is 6B, this is like location on the object, and this is my orientation of the sensor to the object. So I have these two layers of cells here. I'm still confused how
Yeah, those would be the translation and orientation of the features on the object. And this is of the entire hang on.
right, that's the entire object. Right, this is a different, well,
Is it? No, this is the orientation of the sensor.
this is the location on the entire object. This is the location of the sensor to the entire object, or maybe at this point in time.
I guess yeah, those are very local things that are just being applied locally to one of the features on the object
Right. So,
versus like the thalamus.
well, can you draw a
the
picture?
movement would
Can you make a picture that makes it all work?
Yeah.
I don't think,
this
it
is-
may not be hard. I haven't gotten there. I was just
I-
working on it, so.
I haven't thought it through at all.
Me neither.
So I don't know.
Me neither, that's why I'm stuck. It's not like I'm saying, oh, it can't be done. I'm just thinking, we just haven't drawn it yet. I haven't thought about it clearly yet. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to come up with a picture that captures everything and says, oh, yes, now I see, it's all clear.
And so we would have. Are these both layer 4 now? Or-
I didn't say where they are.
Okay. All right, so we have.
So, no, in the classic view would be the static one is layer 4 and the changing one is layer 3. Okay,
Okay, so we have.
because layer 4 we know those represent edges not moving, and layer 3 represents edges moving. That's a classic view. So we'll say that's a delta, the changing one. And just bear in mind that when we say layer 3 and layer 4, there could be multiple different types of cells in layer 3. There could be temporal pooling cells in layer 3 and motion detection cells in layer 3. And so we can't say, oh, we've allocated all of layer 3 to do something. You know, it's like, it could still be temporal pooling and passing up to the next region. So,
Yeah.
So the subject, don't think these aren't definitive answers to where these things are.
So we have the feature input. Going to both of them, I guess. We get the change in.
If we have an input from the sensor, some of that input dictates something's changing and something dictates it's not changing.
Yeah, so we have the Magnucellar pathway, which would detect like motion changes or.
If you actually look at this, this is really key. If you look at the magnocellular cells, they are center surround cells that detect motion, detect change. They do not detect motion. They detect change.
Oh, interesting. So
Only when you
perfect.
get to the cortex does it look like they're detecting motion. Like,
That's exactly what we want, right?
I think so, right, yes. I mentioned each other, but it occurred to me that the inputs are center surround, non-directional, but they detect change. And that's the universal rule that there's two types of inputs, ones that are static, you know, and I forget what they call it, and the others that they're change detectors. So it is clear, according to the literature, that the idea of motion only appears once you get inside the cortical column. Like once you like motion through space or something like that. So of course, most neuroscientists believe that's hard coded or it's it's genetic. But the more generic case would be you get a bunch of change bits, and then the cortex has to figure out what they represent. Like does a spatial pool on it. And says, okay, I think that's more likely to be like an edge moving. An edge.
So yeah, so we would have the Magnucellar pathway going into layer 3, telling it what changes it's detecting. Then we have features going into layer 4. We have movement of the sensor relative to
Which
the
is
body.
also magnocellular pathway, but over a broader area, right?
Yeah,
Well, actually, that would actually be total movement. Right. Let's leave it right, just like you said it, right there. That's good.
and that would be transformed into movement relative to the object
By the thalamus.
by the thalamus using
Yeah.
those backward projections. Okay, so that's pretty much what we had so far, except that we have the delta change going in here and having a separate behavior model here.
Right.
With the separate reference frames, Did you say anything already about whether they would both also be in layer 6?
I have no idea. I'm totally, it would be, if I had to take a guess, I would say that they're both in layer 6 because you want them both to be driven by the same motion vectors, right? Here's how I imagine that would look. Here's a set of in this case, I view the mini columns as representing, these are the things that are required by grid cells. They have a series of cells that all represent motion in some direction. And the frequency, they're voltage controlled oscillators, so the frequency at which they're firing is depending how fast you're moving in that direction. And there's a background frequency that does not change. And so which of these cells lines up with the background frequency, that's your hot spot there. And as you move, that cell will move along this trajectory. Okay, that's the basic theory about how grid cells might come about. Because this one's in phase, then this one's in phase. And the faster you move, the faster it moves. So this is like a repeating one-dimensional space vector. Like you're along here, and then I can't, it repeats and repeats. Okay, so that's, and you have a whole bunch of these, it's unique space. So what I was imagining now is you have two sets of these things. They're both being driven by the same motion vector. But this set anchors differently than this set. So anchors 2 and anchors
to the
1. So this would be object, and then this would be behavior. So that they're really just all tied together. They look very, very similar. The difference would be that the moving cells doesn't continue down here. It would just it would loop around here like this and this and this. And this one loop around here, like, it doesn't really loop like that. It just keeps moving off back on. And but these would have different anchorings between them, so that
these would have associative connections to layer 4 and those to layer 3.
Right. Well, basically, I have 2 reference frames. I can connect to whatever I need to connect to. Right. So this one would be driven. The behavior one would be driven by changes. Right. Right. So I would imagine those are both down the bottom there.
Say?
Behavior reference frame and object reference frame.
Okay.
Okay, so
the sort of base stapler object that we apply changes to. Is that what you're the object reference frame?
The base stapler would be in the associative connections between these, like between the reference frame for the object and the features, the static features.
So imagine this, you've learned a static stapler. That's just the object reference frame in layer 4 patterns, right?
Mhm.
Now something starts changing on the stapler. That re-anchors the behavioral reference frame, but
Mhm.
doesn't touch the object reference frame. So now the behavioral reference frame is saying, we're starting a new behavior. And that behavior, although it's located on the stapler space, it's on the stapler, it occurs one place. But because we have its own little reference frame, we could apply it to other objects other times. So that's the key there.
Right, there's also object ID somewhere in layer 3 or layer 2.
So yeah, we're not worrying about that right now, but there's someplace.
Yes.
All right, so with the application of behavior to the object model creates predictions in layer 4.
Well,
right?
we
Or
have,
what to be observed.
well, we haven't
next
said that
month.
yet. We haven't said how we're gonna do that yet. What it does say that if I recognize an object and I recognize, or if I recognize a behavior
Mhm.
at some location on some object, I will now apply that behavior to those locations on the object, whatever the behavior model says. We have not yet worked out exactly how it leads to a prediction in layer 4.
Mhm.
That's where we got in trouble yesterday or 2 days ago.
Yeah, so I guess
Not
zooming in
trouble,
on that
that's where we
part,
stopped.
so we zoom in on this layer,
Layer 4 or layer 3?
both of them.
Okay.
kind of what you drew there.
Right,
So we have, at the top, we have the delta changes, and here we have absolute values. So for the delta changes, we would have translations in space, and we would have rotations in space.
well, this is a hypothesis, because
Yeah.
I'm not sure the rotations make sense, yeah, but let's keep going. I mean, that's a question, this is a hypothesis, and now saying maybe I'll have rotations there.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the macrocellular, like you wouldn't be able to distinguish like the local flow from whether the object is just moving like this or whether it's moving like
But
that.
it's no question at all that the cortex calculates changing in orientation from the large magnocellular pathway.
Yeah, I didn't even get to applying the orientation yet. I'm just saying those should be able to detect orientation changes of local features.
I guess I'm saying this is the current hypothesis, because I have no evidence in the biology that you see that, but I'm good with it for now. I mean, the other edges moving, we see that, that's well known, right?
Have they ever tested the, like, having like an edge and just
I don't know,
doing this?
maybe they have, I just don't remember it. All I do know is very well known that there's edge movements.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like it's the exact same mechanism. You just have to slow it
My
down.
point is that at the moment, this is a hypothesis, because we don't have any evidence for it. I'm good with it. I'm just pointing out that all neuroscientists would say, oh yeah, there's this edge moving, mini columns.
Yeah, because they tested moving edges, but I
I
mean, it
don't know.
seems like the exact same thing. If you have
I
like
agree.
a little
100%.
patch, you can detect that there's like local flow like this, but you could also, in like with the exact same mechanism, detect that there's like kind of like a flow field that
Right,
rotates like this.
right. What's interesting is that somehow we believe that they differentiate down in layer 6, that somehow layer 6 knows how to tease those two apart, put them into two different representations, where in some sense you could argue it's just like take a bunch of change bits and map it into a set, put them into a spatial pooler, and some of the spatial pooler, some would be rotations and some would be movement, whatever you
Yeah,
see.
exactly.
Right. The weird thing about it is we're hypothesizing that they're separate down here, so how do they get separate down here and they're not separate up there? I'm
Oh,
running,
you mean here?
yeah,
I guess down here, they're really different. They're not just a difference in whatever local flow you observe. Here, we're actually moving through the whole reference.
I know,
frame.
but remember, it's just center surround bits coming in, so the system has to figure out what those center surround bits mean. Let's keep going. I actually went as far as saying, maybe we're wrong, maybe the location and the orientation are combined together down
Yeah, you mean,
because-
so basically, if we have movement of sensor relative to the body, that movement would include detecting rotation of the
there.
sensor.
Right. And if you think about in the grid cells in the entorhinal cortex, there's these pure grid cells, but there's far more cells that are orientation and grid sensitive. They're gritty in one direction. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So that, which is consistent with this hypothesis. I'm just constantly keeping all the options open. That's all I'm doing. I'm not trying to interrupt you. I'm just agree with
sorry.
it. I'm just saying, okay, if I accept that movement and orientation, movement in directions and orientation change are just all universally the same, they're just whatever motions were detected and put to a spatial pooler, then I have to ask myself, well, why didn't that happen down here? Because here I have the same kind of input coming in, and yet I'm assuming that they're separated to location and orientation. And then I say, well, maybe that's incorrect. Maybe there's a spectrum between location and orientation, and that seems more consistent with the biology. But let's keep going. Let's say there's orientation, just like you're drawing up there. And I'll stop.
Yeah, I guess just on that point here. So I agree, it's an interesting idea of like whether this movement of the sensor relative to the body actually also includes rotation of the sensor, but then here it's actually the inferred location on the object and the inferred orientation of the entire object. So it seems like that's quite different than just.
No, basically the input would be turned into, for example, movement in some direction and rotation and orientation, one way or the other. And then the the grid cell mechanism would turn into a specific orientation of this object or a I don't know.
Yeah, so
Alright.
basically this could be a location / orientation input, but then that would still tell you how to move through that grid cell
right.
space.
Okay, let's put it aside for now. Can we, I shouldn't have interrupted you. Can we just go back to the,
Get back to this.
yeah,
Um,
this is hypothesis that maybe we're representing rotations and orientation as part of the, just like anything, any other type of change.
yeah,
Just to take-
all the behavioral changes we could have.
And it was color as well.
Well, that would be,
Could
color would be a different type of change, right?
Yeah. Color change, could be temperature change. I don't know what else. Like
But
child object ID
In
change.
the future, it could be any kind of weird, well, we have to do child object. But child objects don't work there. Because there are too many. Right? That's the problem. You can't represent child object IDs with minicolumns. That's the problem there.
Okay, so we have a bunch of changes, they're all treated the same way, could be but just to focus on translation and orientation right now,
Yeah.
we need to be able to. Or it would be useful if we can apply those to the static features that are coming in, so if I'm sensing like an edge or a curve or a spike, a peak or whatever. It would be useful to be able to apply these local behaviors to these local features.
Right.
And I guess that's just maybe the last thing I'm going to say because I don't know how that would happen.
But
One thing
that's the crux of the matter here, right?
yeah, I mean, one thing that could be, if we have the thalamus and it can rotate the things, we could have a connection here, tell it how to rotate the static feature. And that way, when it comes in here, it's already in the expected orientation.
Maybe, let's say that orientation, I don't think you need that. I don't think you need the thalamus for this. Here we're, at this point, we're just talking about, on, like edges of the object or on and off things, right? There has to be, in a blank field, these wouldn't get activated, but only when I see some bits moving, right? So, this might be think of it this way, this is an edge moving in a direction like this. This would be an edge that's rotating at the same point.
Yeah, but would it have to always be an edge? Could it just be any local feature that's rotating?
Not with this mechanism we've specified right now. Because I have no way of representing, the whole idea here is I take the simple representation and I form unique in context of the behavior. So I can say, oh, there's a rotating edge here, but all I can do is say it's unique in the context of the behavior, and I can predict, I can say that in the next moment, it'll be in a position like this, or next moment, all I can do is predict the edge at a different orientation. This predict the edge at a different location, this predict the edge at a different orientation.
It just seems that way you're kind of tying the behavior to the feature. So if I now have like a bowl-shaped kind of thing, and that is moving, I don't really want to have to relearn all of these possible translations that this bowl-shaped objects could go through. I just want to be able to apply translation and orientation, how I learned it for other features to this.
Well, in its core form, this would work. If I never saw this before, this is just a bunch of little edges that this thing is seeing, right? Different columns are seeing different things. So you could say, at this point, there's a slow movement of this edge, and this is like, it actually looks like it's, well, you could say,
Yeah, I was assuming
Or
that's
you
like
can-
the smallest possible
all
feature.
you can do is say, at time t, it looks like this, and time t+1, it looks like this. And all these have some movement vector, and so I could learn this set of movement vectors is followed by this set of movement vectors and followed by this set of movements. I could represent this curving C without knowing anything about a C. I could say it's a bunch of lines that are at this point are moving in these directions. The next point, I observe it they're moving in this direction, the next line is they're moving in this direction. It doesn't necessarily allow me to fill in over time. Right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe when I said bowl, it sounded like this was actually a big object, but I just meant this is like, instead of having a flat surface, it has a round surface.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we see representations like that.
So yeah, you would have to then decompose everything into tiny edges, even round surfaces.
This is where yesterday I started thinking maybe to solve this in an efficient way, I need multiple columns. I can solve this problem very inefficiently. The model could just say there's no concept of C-shaped structures. It's just a bunch of bits moving another bunch of bits and moving another bits, or changes. I can learn a very complex behavioral model, how all those changes, what changes I see at the time, but it doesn't, and that would help me infer this behavior, but it doesn't, it's very inefficient because I have no way of sort of moving the whole thing. I just have to learn every point at every point in time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
Okay, how do more columns?
well,
Like composing,
right,
making a C shape out of several.
right, because what reality would be, to have a single column to do that, it would have to sample all these points and then sample all the next points and sample all the next points. It would take forever to learn because I can't do it in one pass. But if I have a bunch of columns observing the same thing, and these columns somehow know where they are relative to each other, somebody's going to be observing every part of this, right, at once. And that's where I started, and that's as far as I got. Because it seems like they could coordinate with each other saying, okay, I don't know how that would work, but they seem like they could coordinate each other to essentially move everything at once without me having to learn all the points in between.
So this is all just based on the fact that people don't only observe at moving edges in the brain, right? But it just doesn't seem possible.
No,
Like, imagine at a higher level in the hierarchy, imagine the stapler where you have the logo on it that rotates in the opposite direction when you open the stapler.
Yeah,
You can learn that behavior and you can apply that rotation to the child object, to the
Okay.
logo.
right.
So
So that's a separate, I think that's a separate problem. There's two problems we haven't addressed yet. How do I deal with the fact that child objects can be changing, and child objects, there are many child objects, and therefore I can't represent child objects with minicolumns. That's one problem.
yeah, it's another problem.
And then the separate problem is I'm moving a bunch of stuff through space, and that stuff is not changing other than it's moving and changing orientation. This is the top of the stapler. This is a separate problem. This is saying, how do I represent that in an efficient way? Right,
Yeah.
which is not quite the same as the child object problem.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm bringing up the child object because you can start imagining learning the movements of edges and then decomposing things into edges, but it just kind of falls apart once you need to apply movement to like more complex
Right,
things.
right, I agree. So then we said to ourselves, okay, well, the edges are at orientations. That's like an object at orientations. And then that's one kind of a child object is an edge. Then I could have a logo at orientations and so on. But I can represent an edge simply at all its orientations. I can't there's an infinite number of child objects that I might represent. They're all very high dimensional vectors. And so how do I do? I can't take that child object ID and say edge is like one thing. Oh, I have an edge. That's one object. I can represent it in different orientations. I can't do the same with a child object because there's so many child objects. I can't have minicolumns dedicated to child objects. Right? The answer obviously has to be somehow a projection from the parent to the child. So, for example, can we just brainstorm about this a little bit? Imagine, I think we did this the other day. I have two regions, hierarchical columns, hierarchical regions. they're both recognizing the stapler. And then I see the stapler top moving. Maybe what that does is it says, here's a region that's moving. I'm going to project down to here to that same region, only pay attention to that region and rotate the stapler. So I'm rotating the whole, in some sense, I'm rotating the whole stapler down here, but I'm saying attend to only that part. So that's pretty simple. I have to pass the ID back. That's not hard, I think. And I just have to say, rotate. And then I also have to say, only pay attention to the part that's included in the behavioral. I always picture like a behavioral object is occupying a bunch of points in the space. And those are the only points that matter. It's like only in the physical object, the only points that matter in the topology, morphology object, the only points that matter is where there's an edge. Everything else is nothing. Here, the only points that matter is where there's a change. Nothing else matters. So I could say, project down my change locations onto this guy and say, okay, you're doing the following, you're rotating this, but only pay attention to the observed, to the attended part that's actually moving. Everything else you're going to ignore. So I could use the model here of the stapler, and all I'm doing is rotating this part of it, and now I have this sort of parent-child relationship where I can use this to generate all the predictions I need. Does that make sense at all?
The behavioral mask should be possible to do because we're at the top level, we're learning behavior
Right.
on location.
If I'm looking at the behavioral object, there's points in space of that behavioral object where there are changes occurring. I then go down to the child object, which is co-located, right? There's columns co-located on those columns right now. Those are the ones we care about, somehow move that subset, or I don't know. I don't know how it works. I don't know. I'm trying to solve the stapler problem by saying I have another model of the stapler here. And if I could just rotate this model, only pay attention to that part, then I can make predictions, even though this is in a novel position. I've never seen it this way, but I could predict, I could say, what would this look like if I opened it all the way up? I can say, oh, well, I just rotate this part, and now I have this object at a different orientation, and I could make predictions based on, I'm using the model here. I'm rotating this whole space. I can't rotate this space, but I can rotate this space, and if I can make predictions on that.
Yeah, that would definitely make it easier to rotate all features.
It's gotta be something like that. I don't know what else it could be. It's like when I open the stapler, you can just imagine, you open the stapler, visualize this. You're opening the stapler. It's like it's like the top of the stapler, it's nothing changed. It's just the top of the stapler. You know how to predict any kind of prediction on it, right? It's as if the whole stapler rotated and you're looking at the top of the stapler. No problem. It's not like I'm doing translations or moving and, calculating something. It just feels like I'm just looking at the top of the stapler. There it is, it's like as if the whole stapler is
Right, yeah, it kind of has to be that way because with this idea that those behaviors would tell me, would rotate the features, that doesn't work anymore. Once I saccade to different locations on that part of the stapler, like after the stapler has moved, I'm not really in a movement part of the sequence anymore, but I still want to make predictions about the correct orientations of features. So in this one, it would work because we are rotating the entire stapler or top part of the stapler.
Yeah,
So we can make predictions about any point on here.
right. Just like we normally do it.
Whereas here we are kind of past that point in the sequence.
I'm agreeing with you saying without following the details.
Yeah,
This gets back to the other problem we have, which is like when do we take an object and break it into multiple separate pieces, right? We talk about that a lot. It's always bothered me. This tells you if I see something move, like the top of the staple move, it might automatically learn the top of the staple as a separate object down here. You could say, I'm going to create a child object of a subset of this object I had before. And now this is its own child object, and now I'm just rotating the child object up here. So it's basically says, if you start changing independently of everybody else, I'm gonna split you off, and you're gonna become your own thing.
That's nice because it doesn't have, it works without doing that too. Like in the long run, it tells you how to split out the,
Right,
Child
it
object,
doesn't
but-
require from the start.
yeah, the first time you see it, you can still make inference.
Right, I could, well, yeah, I could see a static stapler. And just learn as a static stapler, I'm very, very happy. Then as soon as something starts moving, it tells me right away, like this part is separate from that part, maybe you should model that part separately. And then I suppose at some point, I don't know, maybe you forget, I don't, but at least gives you the clues to start what to do. All right, let's see if we could, I know this is really hard. Everyone's been pretty quiet, maybe because we're talking too much, I'm talking too much, but maybe because it's really hard. Basically, this is part of the solution, not a complete solution. When things start moving here, we try to break off a piece, the part that's moving, we instantiate it down here in a full model, isolate the section somehow, turn this into its own model. And now I'm assigning that own model to this thing. That's the basic idea. It doesn't solve everything, but that's a part of the solution, I would say.
Making it its own model is like a step that happens over time, right? It's not like the first time you see it, you can still do it with stapler being a complete model.
Right, you start with a complete model. It's not even clear that it becomes its own model. I mean, the mechanism we just described here doesn't require it being its own model. It just requires that I'm able to isolate a subset and treat it as a child object.
Yeah.
In fact, it would be better if I didn't create my own model, because if I create a new own model, I have to relearn it. I have to relearn the reference frame. Okay, so let's back away from that. Basically, I have two models of the stapler. That's not too hard. We got that already. It starts moving. The upper guy says, okay, I'm just gonna tell whoever's below me to isolate this section that's moving and make predictions based on that section that moves. It could even be like a dynamically determined child. That's the way to look at it. Think about the stapler. I don't actually ever think of the top of the stapler as separate from the stapler. I don't expect to see it over on the counter over there, right? It's always attached to the stapler. It's not really its own object. I've never really separated it onto its own object. It's just, when it's moving, I treat it like it's its own object. So I actually don't have to learn as a new object. I can just dynamically, on the fly, create a child and say, okay, this is the part that's changing. You just ignore the rest of this. I'm telling you to rotate, you're rotating, or whoever's doing it, rotate it, and now we can make predictions based on this rotated section relative to me up here.
It's nice because it's a bit like the bent logo. You could have, if you just have a hinge behavior, you can apply it at any part of the stapler, like I don't want to break any objects, but you can imagine the hinge being here, and you can imagine it being here or here. So you can apply the object to subsets of the full object. You can apply the behavior to arbitrary subsets very easily without ever seeing it like that before.
Right. I even imagine on the top of the stapler, instead of going up like this, what if it opened up like a set of doors like this? As it goes up, it goes. You can imagine that. I can learn that really quickly. This guy doesn't really care. It says if this thing is moving, I isolate a subset down here. Well, maybe I'd isolate the whole. No, that gets in the problem. Okay, sorry. Really, I know the objects. I'm saying a behavior that looks like stapler, and then as you open the stapler, it becomes like this, right? And so these little things can flip up like that.
Yes, means attached to it.
That would basically means, I don't know, just imagine it just like little piece, this opens up like a set of doors. Whoop, whoop. There's a base plate here, and then the hinge here and a hinge here. Okay. And there's a big hinge here. Right, he goes.
Yeah.
Um. I have to make separate predictions about this. And separate predictions about this, and separate predictions about this part, because. The original model didn't know any about these movements. But to make predictions here, I have to assume this is all one piece. To make predictions here, I have to assume this is one piece. And so I'd have to sort of say, I'm breaking this into 3 children that are behaving, have their own, it's like I'm 3 child objects now. There's this one, and this one. And I'm learning how those child objects are moving. How they're moving, I'm basically saying, take this part, isolate it, imagine it rotated like this, now make predictions about it. Take this part, rotate it, imagine it like that, now make predictions about it. And nowhere do I actually have to learn these as separate components, separate objects. I just temporarily.
And we don't have to actually rotate the incoming features because we're just rotating the reference frame of the child object.
Right, we have to do rotating the reference frame and attending to some subset of it.
Yeah.
And what it also tells me from a child object point of view, I can't do all 3 of these at once. I'd have to rotate the child object in one position in one area. Then to make predictions over here, I'd have to imagine this part being a child object and rotate it in its position. Then I have to imagine this part being a child object and rotate it in position. I would have to mentally split between these 3 things. I think that's what you would do. I think you'd have to attend to this and also anchor onto it. Attend to this, anchor onto it, attend to this, and anchor onto that section. Just like you can attend to this and anchor onto it. It's like a way of saying,
What do you mean by anchor on?
I have to anchor the orientation and location. It's like, imagine if I was observing a stapler and it was largely occluded.
Mhm.
So all I saw was a piece of it. I could still infer that's a stapler, and I would say, oh, where I am a stapler and what orientation is a stapler. That's what I mean by anchor on. It's like saying, oh, I'm only seeing a part of the stapler here. Where's the rest? Where's the stapler? It's okay, the stapler, I'm only seeing this piece. I would imagine.
It's kind of like snapping your internal model of it onto.
Right, it's almost
onto
like,
the observed.
right, imagine I only have a model of the closed stapler. Now I have, and that exists down in the lower regions, down here.
Yes.
And then what I'm doing, I'm saying, it's like all of a sudden I'm saying, oh, there's the stapler, it's occluded and it's its location of this orientation. I can only see that section of it, but that's still a stapler. I know what it is. Then I go, oh, there's another part of the stapler, not another part. Oh, there's the stapler again. Oh, now it's at this orientation. I only see that part. The rest of it's occluded. And so it's the same thing. I can do this with a static model of the stapler and just say, oh, there, I can see an included part and I can say, oh, I recognize what it is and I see the orientation of it. That's what I meant by anchor onto it. It's like I have to basically anchor the location and the orientation of this section. The part this guy's saying attend to God, I'm trying to remember how this.
But it's, yeah, exactly how you said, you kind of forget the exact words you use, snap the full model over it. Kind of, I imagine it kind of like augmented reality. You try to do object detection, and then when you recognize the object, even though you see only part of the fork, you then project like the entire model of the fork over it with the orientation that you recognized. And that lets you know where to predict what if it wasn't occluded.
Mhm.
And then I guess with this mask, it would be like augmented reality, but you only project part of that object model on there.
And we don't want to fill in the rest of it, but
Yeah.
we're really basically saying, it's sort of the opposite of augmented reality. It's like segmented reality. It's like, oh, you pay attention to this part, forget the rest of the world. It's just this part. What do you see there? Okay, you see a stapler part at some orientation. Good. Ignore everything else. Would this solve all of our problems? What if I see the stapler opening and I want to predict? Yeah, it would work. The behavioral model is sort of like a point cloud where changes occur. And so as the stapler open, that point cloud sort of reflects the movement It just reflects the movement of the stapler. Remember, someone showed the random bit pattern, then you could show movements through the random bit pattern. Remember that image?
Yeah.
And I said I coded that up when I was young. My point of that's a little bit like this behavioral cloud. It's basically saying it's all nothing until I see a change. That's all you're gonna get, just points and change. So, so that it's like as the top of the stapler moves, those little points where the changing are occurring. So there's a line of changes that are occurring. And those points of change are being, can somehow define what we want to see below. And tell it what, then the thing below says, okay, here's my specific predictions about, it's very much a hierarchy. It's the same as a hierarchy. Excuse me, the same as composition.
Yeah, I have a question about
Yeah.
hierarchy and like sort of a behavioral hierarchical. Like if I had a higher level behavior, and let's say, and if you want to project that behavior down to child objects, let's say I had, this is my parent, and it has 4 things here,
Okay.
4 children,
Yeah.
and I want to apply what, and behavior in this parent object is that it rotates by 90 degrees.
The whole thing.
Yeah, the whole
Is
thing.
that really a behavior of that object? That to me, I wouldn't define as behavior of the object because it's not changing the model of the object. Be careful.
Okay.
Remember, I keep going back to this. I've defined behavior in a very specific way, which is maybe not sufficient, but all we're considering right now is that something in the model has changed, not that the whole model is rotated relative to the sensor. That's not changing.
Right, okay.
You could rotate
So
the
the
B
parts
section,
themselves have to change.
something in the
relative
model
one
has to
another.
change. The model itself has to change, not my orientation to the model, but the model itself has to change.
So if you attach
Okay.
that square to another object, like a propeller on an airplane, the
Oh.
propeller is rotating relative to the airplane model.
Or,
So
but,
it's behavior.
I could probably redo this example.
well, you could just take,
but it would
just say you have
get
to.
messy.
You
say,
could
like-
just draw another big square around it.
Or
and say that
could you
type
just
of
like rotate the B element? Rotate. the-
Yeah, that's how I'd have to do it. So this becomes a B,
Okay,
something like that.
yeah, that would qualify as a behavior of the object.
Okay.
And Vivian's right, if you took that whole object and put it as part of another composite object, then moving, if that was the dinner plate and it's now on the table setting and you move the dinner plate, well, yeah, that would be changing the dinner plate, changing the place setting. But on its own, the dinner plate doesn't change when you just move in a different position, so, yeah, so maybe this is like the B is the dinner plate and you rotate it or something.
Okay.
On the place setting.
I'm not sure if this, I'm not sure if this is gonna,
What were you gonna say?
well, what I was gonna say, like, I could probably try to break this out even further,
Well,
but.
what were you gonna say, the
um,
original idea?
Okay, well, the original thought is, if I wanna take this rotation and apply it to the child objects, how do I make sure that it does? That's A, that's B, that's C, that's D. Actually, I may have misplaced these, but I think you get the
I got
idea.
it, right, that's C,
Um,
yeah, right, that's supposed to be C,
How do I make sure it does that instead of doing
yeah.
A, B?
I think we
So
have,
that I don't individually rotate, but the entire
Because
thing,
you're
because.
rotating the entire reference frame of the whole object.
there's
They all come with it.
nothing different.
Yeah.
You're not rotating each of the features on its own. Like everything that comes in here is the same. You're just rotating this grid that you have for the object. The reference frame.
Remember, the way we did this is that the parent reference frame, the parent column represents the whole thing. And the child object is attending to these features at different points in time. So if you rotated the whole thing, the child would also be seeing them rotated. It would be attending the B and the A and the C and the D in a rotated position. And nothing's really changed. They're both rotated, and the mechanism is it calculates the relative orientation of the child and the parent. That was this complicated thing that Viv and I worked out. And so the model says, I don't care, if everything rotates together, as long as the A and the parent have the relative orientation, it's the same, nothing's really changed. And if I know B, if I know the parent object, like this one, and I know its orientation, I can then calculate what the orientation of the child object is. So that's part of the compositional model, object model.
Okay.
That's already in there.
I have a question. The ABCD example, there's the one that Scott gave and he rotated the whole thing. How would we learn that change in orientation in the brain?
Which change over the one that I think
Yeah,
rotated?
if it's not a behavior of that object, if it's rotating this whole thing.
What am I learning? What am I learning?
That's the whole object rotated.
It's part of the model. I don't have to learn it. I just apply a new orientation to the whole
You
thing.
just sent down
A different
a
orientation.
different orientation here. So everything is getting rotated before it even goes into the column. So you just keep making the correct predictions in the object's reference frame.
Right?
But it's not changing in the object frame.
No, the object reference frame is the same. It's just changing in the reference frame of the sensor. It
Of the
says,
sensor, but
so-
it doesn't have to be compositional, it doesn't have to be part of something else.
it is compositional. The object is compositional, but everything rotates, everything.
No, I mean, it doesn't have to be a child of something else so that we can represent this.
If it's a child of something else, then we're learning a behavior, which is what we're just talking about. Again,
It's not.
to learn this and the different orientations, I don't change my model of anything.
Right.
If the model is a table with a cup on it, and every time I come into this room, there's this cup on the table. This is a child object of the table. And now I say, oh, by pushing a button, this rotates like this, and it goes back like that. That's now a behavior of the table. All right, and the point is, I don't want to learn a new object. I don't want to learn a new model for the table. I don't want to learn a new model for the cup. I want to somehow saying the cup has now changed relative to the table, and it's back again.
So we would learn this in 6B, then I guess, the orientation with respect to the sensor. If it's not a part of the table behavior.
What I'm suggesting, if this occurs, the thing that we just were working on the board is saying, okay, with two objects, table and cup. And they're in this relationship. And we were working through the idea of what if I didn't even know this was a cup? It just looked like it's just part of the table. And then one day I say, whoa, look at that. That part of the table changed. This would be all these change detectors here relative to the table. And that's what we're dealing with. And now we're saying, okay, we're saying that when you do this, maybe it breaks out this part of the table model. And it's sort of like saying, okay, the table's still here, but part of the table has rotated. Just append to this part of it, the part that rotated, ignore the rest of it, but I can still use my table model which included the cup. This is a weird example, but it's as if like, I already know what this looks like. It's just part of the table. It's part of the table. Now it's like this, like, okay, that part of it, it's like, I'm going to invoke the model that I had before of this thing. It's as if the whole table rotated, but now I have two objects. I have the parent object, which is the table, and now I've broken out a part of the table object as a separate little temporary thing and said, just imagine that part of it rotated now relative to the original thing. And because we have to be able to make all the correct predictions here, right? I can't see that. I can't turn this and go, oh, that's something totally new. I never saw it. What the hell's that? It's like, oh, I knew what that is. It's part of this table. And now it's rotated. I still know what it is, but it's just separated from the table. It's like got its own, it's instantiated itself independently of the table, even though it was learned as part of the table. So at this point in time, the reference frame for the cup and the reference frame for the table are essentially one's in the parent column and one's in the child column. In the child column, it's the same reference frame as the original table. In the parent column, it's the table. But in the child column, I've rotated the table and only attended to part of it. I know it's weird, but this is
so we did the whole thing and then just all week. Okay.
We're working, as always, we're walking ourselves into deductive logic saying it must do this, as strange as it may seem. And then after a while, you go, okay, that's not so bad.
So it's not that we create a separate morphology model of the cup.
Not right away, certainly not right away.
Is it possible that we are copying, can we copy the whole model into a lower level?
You can't, there's no, in the brain, there is no copying.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's taken me a long time to really get, but it's just, there is no copying. You can associate two things. But
Yeah,
there's no way of taking knowledge of what a cup looks like in one column and transferring to another column. They can learn simultaneously, you can be association learning, there's various things you can do, but you can't like just take all this knowledge and it's not like we have data buses and memory you can copy and transfer it someplace else. It doesn't, neurons don't do that. So, which is good because it's really quick and efficient, right? The brain's figuring out it's really efficient. Well, this seems like a good start. What are we gonna call this? We call this like forking. I don't know, what is it? It requires having two models of the object to begin with. It requires that there's a parent object model and a child object model of the same thing. And
It's almost like the lower level model doesn't even need to learn the behavior. It's just the,
no, it doesn't. Right.
so it's basically selectively applying a behavior to
Right.
the
right.
morphology of an
I
object.
wonder,
in the lower level.
if that's the way to think about it all the time. Meaning behaviors like composition requires two levels, two hierarchical levels. This would even work in the primary sensory regions, by the way, because you can think of features coming from the retina. It's very simple child object. And so behavior says, well, this wouldn't apply to color changes. I don't think this really only applies to what does it? Well, definitely this applies to morphology changes like the state of opening and closing. It definitely applies to all situations. Does it apply to all behavior changes? What if I have a traffic light and show you red, yellow, green?
We assume the whole traffic light changed color and we're just attending to the.
No, I'm just saying, do I have to have a child object? There's no new orientation. It's just some feature at the same location has changed. This two-level thing would be necessary when one part of an object moves relative to another part of an object, whether it's moving in one direction or changing orientation. If one part moves relative to the whole, then I need this two-tier solution. If I'm just changing the color of something, it's not clear to me. I need to.
Have a separate child.
Yeah, I don't think I need a separate child object.
Oh, one other thing. I don't think you would actually need to set up a behavior ID. Wouldn't you?
I didn't write that.
Right.
You wrote that.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
Just want to be clear.
questioning what I wrote.
Okay.
Because these predictions that whatever the model that recognizes the behavior of the stapler opening needs to send down here is the orientation of that model at a specific location. So that's sorry, I don't really found the words for it yet, but basically we have the stapler model as local changes. Wouldn't this model, instead of having to tell this one, oh, I'm seeing the stapler behavior, it would have to tell it, all right, you should be translating, you should expect the stapler to be in the new location, which is displaced in this way.
Say it again.
That, well, this model recognizes the stapler behavior, I assume.
Yeah.
But recognizing the stapler behavior is really only for the purpose of this module itself, for it to know what changes to expect at the next time step. But then it would only need to send the changes it expects down to this one to tell it in which orientation it should expect the stapler to be.
Well, I think that's more than changes, because, again, imagine if the stapler is opening and it went through some occlusions. And now it reappeared, I would.
Yeah, this one can do all of that, right? I'm just wondering, like, it sounds like this one actually doesn't even need to recognize the behavior of the stapler.
No, it doesn't.
So
It
all
doesn't.
it needs to know is how it should orient the stapler model.
Right, it should say, all it needs to know is, it
So
says,
that means this one never needs to communicate the behavior ID.
oh, it doesn't, oh, down, no, it doesn't have to be already down, right, I thought you meant up or up.
I meant down, but I don't know if it needs to communicate it up either.
Right, this guy, the lower model at the moment, just the first time we do this, doesn't need, it has no idea that a behavior is occurring. Well, it has a signal that says, pay attention to this subset of the model. And it should be at this location, this orientation.
Yeah,
And now but no, it just basically says. It
it says
gonna-
at this location in your object model, you should. Wait,
Right,
it says
it basically
here,
just
here,
rotates
and
it.
you should
It
expect.
just rotates it and it says, okay. You're rotated, you're bounded, don't go out of your bounds. And here's where you're observing it. And go at it. As the sensor moves, it'll be automatically changed into the local orientation. So as I move my sensor up here, it'll move, it'll be equivalent, it'll just automatically move the correct direction down here. Right? You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, I was just having another.
Okay, so basically the only thing it needs to know is, here's where you should be observing this object at this orientation to the sensor, and there's a bound. Don't go outside of the bound, or,
Yeah, and I guess on the point of the bound, I wonder if it has to be like it defines an area, or if it's more like these location by location associations, because if you have a behavior that's not just like a solid part of the object moving like that, but more like a string that kind of swings like this, it would expect different orientations of the object at different locations. So maybe that's a bit too complex of an example.
you lost me on it, but it's a good one. Well, maybe, the word you said, maybe it doesn't have to convey the bounds.
Yeah,
What I do know in the upper model is I know where changes are occurring at this moment in time. Another moment in time, I know the other changes, and another moment in time, other changes. Right, so that's what I know. Does that have to be transmitted down below? Not necessarily. All I need to do is to say, if the upper column could determine, okay, right now, I need you to break off a piece at some orientation. And a moment later says, no, I don't want you to do that, pay no attention to that. Right, you know what I'm saying?
yeah,
It doesn't have to convey the whole bounds, it just has to,
it just has to tell this one, you're here and you should expect this to be on the stapler at this orientation.
right, it basically says, I'm telling you the location and the orientation to the sensor.
Yeah, exactly. But it
And-
doesn't actually have to tell it anything about
Right.
the other points.
But somebody has to know not to go beyond this. And so if I went beyond that up here, I would have to stop telling this to do that.
Yeah, which this one would know because it has the model of the behavior, so
Right.
it knows
So for example, if I slip back onto the base of the stapler,
there's
then-
no change. In
then basically go back to the original orientation and that location.
Yeah.
And then we're in sync again. You know, with the original model.
So, yeah, I guess
I don't know
at
how
least
that,
we don't have to communicate behavior ID down. I
No,
don't know if we
no.
ever need to communicate it.
well,
up.
it was a separate question about, right, now that I have. Basically, I have a model where first it existed in 2 levels. And now. But this can answer something too. You know, we say that every column gets sensory input. Well, every column gets motor input. It's not clear, and I don't think every column gets sensory input. Not every column gets input from V1, from the retina, right? So it may be that the final predictions might always occur at the lowest level. but we still get input from the retina because there's a motion input, right? It's like maybe only the parvocellular is projected to V1 and the magnocellular is projected to V1 and V2. So my point of this is maybe when I learn an object, I'm always making my predictions, the sensory predictions at the lowest level. And I'm making sort of more conceptual predictions at the next level.
Yeah, so you would learn object behaviors higher up in hierarchy, maybe even in places where we only get movement input. And we would then apply them to lower level models that have learned the morphology model.
Maybe, I think what we're saying, let's start in a very small thing. Maybe this is what you just said. Maybe you just said this. I have to assume that if I have to say, if I want to learn some behaviors that change morphology, I have to have two levels. These two odd things have to learn the same object, or they have to form models of the same object. They don't have to be identical, but they have to at least be modeling the same thing in some ways. And then the higher level, the predictions always occur at the first one. So that's where the sensory predictions occur, right? The second one makes predictions of what the first models, this V1, V2 predicts what V1 is going to tell it. But if I want to say what the actual sensory input is going to be, it has to come from V2 to V1 to layer 4. This makes sense. Yes. So the upper level can't make a sensory prediction. It doesn't.
Can I?
Go ahead.
I don't
We're
want
just making all this stuff up. So
This makes sense. The upper level doesn't get sensory predictions. It
well,
gets,
that's second. Yes, we do know it gets input from the retina, so that's confusing, right? But what if it was only the magnocellular input, not the parvocellular input? And just what if it was? It would still work, but just all the predictions would occur down below, and that's going to be necessary for behaviors, because we just said if the object is changing its morphology, we need a lower level to make the correct predictions based on the behavior up here. So the behavior is learned here, and then the actual predictions occur down here.
So this is really nice way of doing it. Now that we tease it apart into two learning modules, can we fit it back into one? I feel like
Why?
the fact that the lower one doesn't need the behavior model, and it just seems like
Well, I think it does.
it just seems like this.
I think the way I've come to think of it, V1 doesn't get input from other learning modules. It just gets it from the sensor, right? So let's say that when I think about child objects, this is how I think about it. What are the child objects to V1? Those are the primitives that can come from the retina. Whatever the retina can represent, which is not very much, but something, right? We know what it gets. It gets a bunch of center surround bits, and it learns what the common patterns of those center surround bits are, whatever that is. It could be little wiggles and curves. This is Bruno Olshausen's work where they did like all these. They've shown that cells in V1 aren't just edge detectors. There's ones that respond to like grids and checkerboards, and it's basically what are the different primitive patterns that can be extracted from the retinal input. And so those are the child objects. And I can't do this mechanism we just talked about because I can't change the orientation of the thing coming from the retina other than just the obviously coordinating with Janet picking up. Okay. I'm just saying the bottom one, we can think of it doing all the same things as the upper ones. It's just got an impoverished child. Does that make sense?
I guess I'm just wondering if this projection, like from the behavior model of this one and where it would expect, like how it would need to rotate that.
Oh.
If this projection could be within one column, we have the behavior model.
Okay,
And
well,
that tells here how to rotate the
but
input.
so what that would require. Oh, I see. Oh, I see what you're saying. I would. Oh, I see what you're saying. Since we're not re-anchoring. would be dynamically changing the orientation of a set of them out of here.
Yeah,
Oh, I like that. I like that. That makes more sense.
I feel like it would be cleaner, nicer.
Although the idea that this is a mechanism for breaking out child objects is still a good idea.
Yeah, I still think this is a great mechanism.
Seems like I still need that somehow, but
No,
maybe
yeah,
not, maybe not,
I-
maybe I can do all the mechanism you just said.
No, I like this mechanism.
But
I
maybe,
just-
maybe we don't have to, maybe we can do just what you just said, maybe we can do it all in one column. So
Yeah.
what this means is that the original, well, here, okay, here's the problem with that. As I move through the original stapler space, I have to know my orientation of the sensor to the big stapler. Now the top of the stapler starts moving. So now my orientation to the stapler is changed, but only for that section. And then if I go back to another section of stapler, I have to change the orientation back again. It's not a problem. It just means the dynamic, I have to be constantly switching back and forth between these.
But wouldn't we have to do the
You
same
have to do the
thing?
same thing there anyway, right? You're right. You have to do the same thing anywhere. But now we're asking one column to do that. Well, that's pretty interesting. I like it. If we can make that work, I like it. Better. It's a little confusing to me. Imagine my base stapler is here. And now I'm going to try to make some predictions about it here, and make some predictions about it here, and make some predictions about it here. And so this is my original object model. And so I have to go from here to there. So like, oh, this location is, no, it's
Oh, there's another problem too.
yeah, what's it?
Um,
It's hard to imagine how you do all that.
basically
Maybe hard to do it here too. I don't.
having a model of the object behavior, like how, like this little, like how little movements or changes
Yeah,
occur over time, doesn't directly tell us at what orientation you should expect the stapler top to be in. Like, just because I'm at this point in time in my change sequence doesn't directly provide me with a location and orientation for the stapler
right.
top.
I know that. And we have a problem going from points of change to projected
Object orientation.
whatever, just
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah.
But it seems like there has to be a solution to that. I'm not sure we know what the right representation for the change is, right? We just know that the model is going to contain points of change. What it's actually representing at those points of change, I don't know. We're imagining it's some movement vector, which makes sense. But maybe it isn't that. But and if it is that, how do we go from that to magically knowing, I don't know what, the new orientation for the whole stapler or something like that?
You have an idea?
No, just try
I
to
have an idea. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
We have to solve the orientation problem anyway, right? That is, imagine you're looking at the whole retina and you rotate your head. Well, we've hypothesized that there are flow beds out there that can detect that pattern different from, eyes moving left and right, right? It's a sort of circular motion, right? We know that our theory says if I rotate my head, I know my orientation has changed via the movement, and therefore I can compensate for it. So we've already hypothesized that there are a bunch of flow bits in the retina that are translated into changing of orientation
Of the sensor.
of the sensor to the object, or right, but it's changing in orientation between two things. Whatever that mechanism, wouldn't it also apply to the top of the stapler? If I was just looking at the top of the stapler, wouldn't those same flow bits be able to determine the orientation of the stapler is changing? It's the same problem.
Well, it's not as global of flow as. if
No,
you-
but it's a local flow.
Yeah, so. So you're saying, all right, so we have
Yeah.
the retina, which detects global flow, which is movement of the sensor. We would have more local flow, which would detect movement of the stapler top. And then we would have very local flow, which is,
Well, I don't know if it's very local. It's, imagine this, if I had a little feature that was, like an emblem, like an A. And it started rotating, I could, the flow bits would be very strong right there, well, yeah, everything's moving. If I'm looking at an edge of the stapler going through here and it's moving this way, my flow bits would be very marginal. Because this flow here and this flow here would be almost identical. This would be slightly more small, slightly smaller, but that would be that motion. So locally, I can't tell this, I can't see this, but I still could have I could have all the flow bits relative to that stapler top. And if all the flow bits relative to the stapler top were not sufficient to determine change of orientation, I'd probably have trouble recognizing it initially. Maybe, I'm just saying that. Can we use the same mechanism we use for, assume that exists for determining change in orientation of the whole world to the sensor? Can that be used here, the exact same mechanism? And I can imagine some situations where it would be very difficult, other situations would be very clear. That it would work.
when you say the same mechanism, you mean the same mechanism to detect the change in orientation or to compensate for it?
Detect it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be the same mechanism. It's just, I guess, the question of if this column that models the stapler, if that would, like, how local is the flow that it's detecting? Is it actually detecting quite large objects moving, like this whole stapler top, or is it detecting very small parts of the stapler?
Well, imagine you have a field of flow bits. At the bottom of the stapler here. Those flow bits would be much more clear, changing in orientation, because they'd be real circular. Up at the end here, locally, they wouldn't be. Because locally, it would just, the end's kind of moving almost at the same rate, so more like, this locally here would look like it's just moving. Here, it would be obvious that it's, I'm just. That would be true if I'm looking at the whole visual field. How do I know the whole visual field is rotating? Because probably there's some point in the visual field where I'm looking where the flow bits are pretty close together and there's obviously, I can detect it locally. But from the distance, it might be hard to detect it,
Yeah, so it's kind of a question how big of an area do you pull the flow over to
Well,
get? like, a
well, in
general-
this case of the stapler, we can't pull over anything larger than the stapler top.
The sensor could.
But there's nothing else moving relative. Those are the only things that are moving.
I mean, if it's way too large, just wouldn't say that something's moving, but basically, when we first extracted these movement vectors,
Yeah.
I at least assume those are kind of extracted from very local flow in the patch, like extracting that there's an orientation is because I'm sensing something like this.
But that works in some
And
places,
that's
but
kind
not,
of a pooled.
but that's some places that work, some places it doesn't work, right? If it's really far out on the stapler arm, it's not, local information is really not.
Yeah, again, and then the question is like, where do we have that large patch that pools for us? And how big is that patch? I would assume it depends on where this column gets input from, if it gets input from a large low resolution patch or a small high
Or
resolution
maybe
patch.
from a bunch of columns looking together,
Yeah, but
right?
I would say, yeah, it's all the same mechanism. It just really depends on where the column gets its input from.
Imagine a whole bunch of columns together. And some are looking at the one end and some work at the other, and together they clearly have enough information to determine rotation. If I've just got a bunch of just one column looking at the end or a couple columns just looking at the end, I won't be able to determine that it's not movement. It's not just translation, but it's rotation. I'm thinking maybe the solution. Maybe requires it, as I really raise the staple top, I actually look at the hinge area and say, oh yeah, it's rotating. You know, I see it there, something like that. So I apply that rotation to every part of the object somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it would be very hard to have that as a necessary condition for each column that it gets. Like for all the objects it models, it gets exactly the right size input to determine.
No, I'm saying this is how multiple columns would collaborate somehow.
Oh. But where would you mean?
All right,
floating?
it would be enough if I had a single column and I brought it down to the hinge and say, okay, what's happening there? It's rotating.
Yeah.
And then I could go and say, okay, where's that one? And then go down, well, but then I don't know, I might be able to learn it that way, but it's really ridiculously hard. I think I might be able to get it to work, but from a practical point of view, you might want to have multiple columns looking at this. And I think, again, I can always get it to work with a single column, but as we're getting to the point when these behaviors are involved, I don't have time to sample everything as the behavior is unfolding. So I can only sample different points in space-time of the behavior, and that may be really difficult to build up a behavior. It might be very hard to learn. Whereas if I can look at all the pieces at once, and somehow these guys are coordinating, you say, yeah, okay, together we can help train each other somehow.
But I don't see how that solves this problem. I mean,
No?
it helps with like practical inference. That's
Well,
what I'm interested in.
which
You mean-
problem? Let's be explicit.
The problem of knowing how to rotate the model of the stapler top just based on flow. So you mean
Why not? I've already got a mechanism to detect rotation from flow. I have to have that. The whole basic models require that, right? It has to come from the
Yeah.
retina. So if I can do it over the whole retina, why can't I do it over a portion of the retina?
for voting? You mean?
No, I'm just in general. The information is there, right?
Yeah,
The information's there. We didn't explain how we did it in the whole retina. We just assumed we did it. Somehow, what's going into the cortex, what goes into the cortex is a bunch of, as far as we know, purely center surround changes. None of those are sufficient to detect anything else other than at this point, there was an edge moving this way. Somehow the cortex is able to take all that information, or the thalamus or somebody, take all that information and understand how to, the whole world is, the whole sensor is rotating, or my patch is rotating. Even though my little section here doesn't look like it's rotating, I know it's rotating. And so there's already a collective somebody determining that there's an orientation change, and even if I locally can't observe it. So I'm just assuming the same mechanism here without saying what it is. But it's now looking at just a portion of the retina. That you don't buy that.
maybe it just. I don't know how you would coordinate that if every cortical column just gets input from a patch. It can't pick which patch, it just gets that input.
Well, actually, let's be careful. What do we know? Where's kind of a black one and erasing? Here's what we know. This is general neuroscience dogma. You have a column. There are cells down in the lower parts of the column that are directly sensitive, and they prefer very large receptive fields. So these cells somehow respond best when there's a huge thing moving like this. And I read that they respond best even to random patterns, and yet Niels couldn't find that paper. But I'm 99% sure I read. I'm sometimes wrong, but I'm pretty sure I read that. That's like how would I come up with it. But even if it's not, it's basically saying somehow already in a local column, we have these things which are detecting some large thing that's moving and something like that. And they respond less as you get closer and closer, but they still, they prefer bigger. And we know that up here, they prefer shorter ones. Okay, so my thinking is if they can detect that somehow, I don't know how they do that. They must be getting converging inputs from magnocellular cells. They must be getting a whole bunch of magnocellular clone cells coming in. And somehow they're figuring this out. That they also are going to get a whole bunch of magnocellular cells and figure out that the orientation is changing. Or maybe someone subcortically is doing that and sending an orientation signal. I don't know, that could be true. But as far as we know, from the retina directly, it's all just center surround cells. So maybe someone else is processing that. Like the only thing else that could process it would be a supercilious or the thalamus. But my assumption has always been the cortex, and somehow it could do whatever, however it does this, it takes that same field and figures out that. So now we're just asking it to do the same thing over a smaller part of the visual field. We're sort of limiting it to whatever the staple top is.
Yeah. I would say it could do that. It's just hard to imagine how it would adjust that size always to the object that it's, or the behavior it's currently recognizing. Or you mean it
I mean,
would,
how to pick the bounds?
yeah. Or otherwise it could only learn objects.
How about
behaviors of a certain size.
this? At any point in time, the model predicts changes at multiple points. Right? It's very rarely just one point. It would be, there's a big cloud of points, essentially outlining the morphology of the upper part of the staple. What if you could, in some sense, say, imagine I was looking at that. I'm trying to say, what if I only look at behavior? I'm only looking at the movement vectors for those points, and their velocity. Is that not sufficient to do what we want to do? What if I feed that into the mechanism for determining motion, and I feed only those points into the mechanism for determining motion? Would it get the right answer? It's like saying, instead of the whole world rotating, I'm just looking at some sample points of the world and see if they're rotating. Same mechanism, subsampling. It seems like almost like that's what you have to do. Now, a single column would have trouble doing this because a single column can only look at one point at a time, right? Well, I don't know how that works.
Wait, can you just repeat again where that would be happening? The subsampling? Or maybe it is.
Okay. Imagine the retina, and there's these magnocellular cells all around the retina. Each one detects change. I take that mass of cells and I bring them into and essentially I can look at those cells, and from those cells I can tell if the system's changing orientation.
Yeah.
Now, I'm still in a very abstract form right now. So now we don't want to look at the entire retina. We want to look at the subset of the retina where the change bits are happening in the behavioral model. So right at the moment, I have a bunch of change bits in my behavioral model. And I look at the changes occurring on those change bits, which is like, it's like a pattern that is, I'm not looking at all the bits in the retina, I'm just looking at bits that are aligned with those change bits in the stapler top. So those things on the stapler top are moving, the stapler top's moving, so I've changed bits there, and I want to calculate the same calculation, but only using that subset of bits. I'm subsampling the entire space, only look at those bits and say, can I determine the orientation change or movement by looking at a subsample of all the bits, only the ones that are aligned with the staple, wherever the change is occurring.
And who would communicate that subset?
I don't
Where
know,
would
the
we get the
information is there. The problem is a single column would have trouble doing that. Just like a single column, you could imagine all those ganglion cells projecting on a single column to do global orientation change or global movement of the eye. I can imagine that. But I can't imagine a single column selectively looking at those different bits based on parts of the model it is not even looking at. The model will tell me if I go to this point, I'll see this change. If I go to that point, I'll see this change. But I'm only looking at one point, so I don't, all I know right now is this change occurring right here, because that's all I'm looking at. But the other columns nearby would be looking at all those other points. So there's a constellation of columns that are looking at the whole retina, and somehow they collectively could say, oh, the parts that we're tending to,
It almost seems like now we're moving the behavior model into this pooling mechanism, like,
think, not a pooling
or,
mechanism, but
or selectively.
a multiple column.
Yeah, it seems like at that point, we don't even need the behavior, like,
Yeah, we
But-
do.
how do we do this pooling without having a?
Well, I
reference
didn't use the
frame
word
for-
pooling. Why are you saying pooling? Where's the pooling?
Oh, didn't you say
Oh, did I? I didn't mean to.
you're selectively picking?
Oh, maybe I
locations
sloppily
to-
said pooling.
Or, yeah, at least like kind of applying a arbitrarily shaped mask onto the larger field of view.
Right. Imagine the following. Imagine, we have a retina here. And you got all these bits out there. I'm not gonna draw them all. These are the magnetized bits. At any point in time, any translation of the eye to the world would result in every one of these bits moving something, right? Either all moving in the same direction, which would be the eye moving, or there'd be some sort of rotational pattern here. Which means the eye is changing, you know, and
Eyes rotating.
the eye is rotating. What's that? The world's rotating, you know, your head's rotating. Your eye is rotating relative to the world. That's what I mean. Head like this, your head, not the eyes wrong, I mean, like, yes. All right. It's clear that the brain is able to figure what this is and bring it to the cortex. That's part of the theory. So, clearly a single column, which is attending to one spot here or here, that attentional spot isn't sufficient. But it could be that that column is also getting, although this is where the parvocellular cells are coming from, it could be saying, oh, the magnocellular cells, or I'm getting all these magnocellular cells from a much larger area. And that would be sort of the evidence in some sense that, oh yeah, okay, I'm only going to detect a feature here, but I'm detecting motion everywhere over a much larger area. And therefore I can know how my patch is moving relative to the world, because somehow I'm getting all this information. I bring it into some big spatial pooler. These receptor fields are quite large out here. I mean, a single magnocellular cell represents a large area out here, where a single parvocellular cell is a very small area here. So I don't have to have a million axons coming in. Maybe 1,000 or a few thousand sufficient to do the whole thing. And this column could say, given that input, which is wide, I can determine how the things are changing. Great. Okay. Now we're saying, what we're trying to do is this column is, we want to do the same thing, but we're saying, oh, we're on a stapler top. So only look at the magnocellular cells in the stapler top. Because these other ones aren't changing, right? These other ones now aren't, the only ones that are changing are in here.
Doesn't the column send signals back to the TRN, which inhibits parts of the thalamus? Good.
Right, we don't know what the TRN does, but that's a good hypothesis that that the TRN, which is presumed to be related to attentional mechanisms, could play a role in that. In my mind, attention has always been a couple of things. It's been to restrict your area of input and to try to recognize what's in that area of input. It's like latching onto it. It's like anchoring to that whatever feature is or whatever object is in there.
And I guess if it's coming from 6A, if it knows what the object is and what the pose is, it is theoretically able to restrict what the thalamus
Yeah,
sends back.
but in our current model there, it wouldn't, how would I tell it to restrict it to the stapler top?
Well, it knows what the object is. It knows what it's supposed to look like and
Well,
what
the
bounds
thalamus
are.
doesn't
But I
know.
can't tell.
Not the
like,
thalamus, the column knows.
Well, but the
But-
column,
the COM wouldn't be able to take that associative model between features and locations and know how that would actually project onto the retina.
what could happen is,
Maybe.
you have all these
It's in
columns,
6A, the
imagine you have all these columns here. You have all these columns that are looking at the stapler top, right?
Mhm.
Each one is independently looking at the stapler top. Each one knows where it is on the stapler top. Each one knows that, that I'm in a change thing here, if something's going on. As a whole, they could project, now, this is now a different picture, this is now the thalamus here. So we get about this best, it's no longer retina. There's this, TRN, each one of these columns is bit, each one says, I'm on an object at some location, I don't know why it's telling it that, but it's possible, and these connections are generally topographically mapped, I believe, I think they are.
Yeah,
Could that? I don't know, what's it telling us now was again? What was it?
Just to restrict where
It might say, cut out the input to from anywhere else.
Yeah.
Right,
basically, because it's a loop. It sends from 6A goes to the TRN, which inhibits the LGN from sending it back to the sending it
something like that, right? So it says there is pass information from me to these guys, but don't pass any other information. So it's like saying the world is occluded right now. All you can see is the top of the stapler.
Right. So the attention is on this.
Right, it's like saying, right. I did this little thought experiment once. I had a picture of a street scene, right? And I had everyone stare at it, and they couldn't see the scene. I flashed it in front of them, just like a flash inference. And oh wait, that was the street scene. Right? And then I say, okay, what was at this location down here? I have no idea. So then I put a little rectangle. I said, you were to fixate on the center dot. So they fixated on center point. Everyone's saying the center point. And then there's a little rectangle down here. So now don't get your eyes off that center point, but attend to that spot. Right?
Oh, I did this from eye tests for optometry.
Did you?
Yeah, like they make you stare at a red dot in the middle and then click whenever you see something in the periphery.
They're changing. Usually they're just changing.
Yeah, it's
Right.
they're
This
not
is
there.
this is different. I said, attend to this rectangle.
Okay.
And so, but don't look at the rectangle, right? But mentally attend to it.
Okay.
And then I flashed the exact same image at the exact same time. And they said, oh, there was a dog lying down there. Now, they had no idea there was a dog in the first image because they were attending here and they saw the whole scene. They didn't get any of the details. Then I did attention to another little thing, and then it said, baguette on the street sign. They couldn't see, you wouldn't see any of that until you attend to it. So my point with this was, you have this ability to, even while you're looking here, isolate a subset. And if you attend to that subset, you actually don't see the rest of it. You just see what's in there. It was like, oh, there's a dog there, right? Yeah, everyone saw the dog, but you didn't see the dog in the beginning. There's too much, right? Normally you have to attend to these different spots, moving your eyes around. So you can just attend to one thing at a time. And then you see the thing in that. That's basically what you're saying here. In some sense, I was telling the TRN, don't pass that information for anywhere else, just from those locations. And then we'll do inference on that.
The difference is here, you know what object you want to separate out because you are already, that signal is coming from the column. So it knows, oh, I want to be on that stapler. But in the experiment you're saying, you're fixating on a rectangle, you don't know that the dog is here.
Here, what the thing I actually have is there's changes at these locations, which is defining a boundary of something. And I'm not actually telling the TRN what it is. Well, the TRN can't know. It doesn't have enough neurons there, so.
Yes, but the bounds for, the column knows where the bounds are because the column knows the object.
Well, actually, right now, the bounds are determined, we're trying to determine a subset of the object. All we know right now is that these dots are changing. That's the information we have right now. You and I can say, oh, that's the top, that's a stapler, but at that point, the signal for change is not stapler. The signal for change is, it's like an edge is not the stapler, a set of edges is a stapler. The change is not behavior, the set of changes is a behavior, but the set of changes would dictate a morphological region in some sense, in theory. And so you're basically, this is sort of like what I did with the dog. It's sort of saying, attend to this region here, which is bounded by changes. And then what you would infer is, oh, there's a stapler there at some orientation. Something like that. All right, I'm gonna have to go unfortunately.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, I can still
Did you
talk,
want
but
to-
I mean.
no, you wanna do one more thing before I go and then?
Do you have something? Like what?
No, it just goes on forever.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah.
It doesn't stop.
Yeah, these
Haven't you
expenses
noticed that,
here.
OJ?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, just.
By the way, I was thinking this morning, I was thinking like, I bet we could wrap up all this within a year. And that may not seem fast to you, but that seems super fast to me. That's like unbelievable. We can actually, I think these things are accelerated. Me actually took a huge step forward this last week.
Yeah.
It's like, if a third of the Cortex is doing modeling of morphology, we just added another third of, and then, there's a few more things we have to do. We have to do behaviors and all kinds of, but it's like, oh man, it's a big jump. We're gonna do more of this. Like, I want to accelerate because you're getting close to the end. You don't want to stop. You want to get going. It's like, oh man, the end is here. Go ahead, OJ.
So, I mean, just help me, I don't have any ideas, so just like, I'm just trying to, I don't know why.
You
my
can
brain
pretend
does
you do
this.
like I do.
Okay, I'm just kidding. So. Just think about things in a weird way, and I just need some help translating. So. So in the symbol column, we have some change section, bound to location orientation. So I'm thinking about something for whatever attribute, there is some change. That is dependent on location,
Well, it's observed at a location.
yeah, well.
Yeah, it's observed at a location, in the
Okay,
object, right? We're inferring an object and I'm assuming we've already inferred the object, like you're looking at the stapler and it starts to move. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
I'm just saying there's a change that's dependent on location and orientation.
All right, but it makes a big difference if you know what we're looking at, or if it's just random stuff.
Okay, so, I mean, so,
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'll let you finish. I'll keep going. I'm sorry.
that adds some location, orientation, and let's say also time.
It's not, if there's a change, part of the change could be orientation, right? That could
Yeah.
be. There's a change. We'll start with the saying there's a change at some location.
Okay,
It may not have an orientation. It could be color. It could be, we don't know. Orientation is one of the possible changes.
well, I would talk orientation of the sensor to,
Oh, there is an orientation, but that's not part of it. Okay, add an orientation in.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, so in the case of color, it doesn't matter what the orientation to the sensor is, because it's just gonna be color.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you again,
Yeah.
okay? Is location in object space?
Yes,
Then you don't have to mention orientation, because we've already taken care of
Okay.
that. The orientation we typically refer to is the orientation of the sensor to the object. If we are locked onto the object, then we don't think about orientation, right? It's,
yes.
good.
And then the problem that we're trying to like predict, it's like if this change, how do we know that the color doesn't change? So. So this orientation, I mean, in this X, Y, Z, so. The change, like basically we want to know. The set of points that is in. That is a subset of the object that is changing.
That we do know that, that was observed.
Yeah.
That's an observation.
Right, but we want to somehow know that this changing does not affect other attributes like color or whatever's.
Well, we know that some changes occurred at some locations.
Yes,
And we will note what those changes are. So if it was a change in color, it would be in the little colored mini columns. If
Yeah.
it was a change in something else, it would be other mini columns.
right,
So again, we've observed either a color change or not color change.
yeah.
We've observed either a edge moving or not moving.
And the problem that we want to find is how do we know what this sub-region is? Is that right, like in this kind of way of thinking?
Right.
Okay. Or sort of, vicinity.
That's the problem. Although I think by the very nature of our definition of how the system's working, it's detecting changes,
Yes,
whether it's changes in color or changes
yeah.
in
to think,
whatever.
changes, yeah,
And those changes all occur at some location.
yes,
Then we would, by definition, the points in this behavioral space, which is the points of all changes occurring at this point in time,
yeah,
would define a morphology,
right,
have to define some sort of morphology. I mean, even if the whole object changed color, at least the color changes on, it's occurring
Yeah.
everywhere.
yeah. I guess it's.
So it's the very nature of detecting a change determines the subset of the object that we need to attend to, or we need to concern ourselves with. Does that
Do
make
that?
sense?
Yeah, yeah, just trying to think if we can do that.
I don't know how you do it, but. And the thing we're struggling with now is that a single column can't imagine all those changes at
Yeah,
once.
yeah.
It doesn't, its model has all that stuff in it. The model says, oh, I look over here, but it can't do that in real time. Fast enough to keep up with things. It could do it fast enough when we're living static objects.
Yeah.
Takes all the time in the world, nothing's changing, but if things are changing, you just don't have time to go sample everything. You have time to make predictions about everything.
I don't have a solution. I'm just like, okay,
Well,
this makes sense to me in
I
the,
think
at least in the
I think
translation.
what you described is correct. I mean, that's the problem.
Yeah,
I feel like we're close to it. Different?
I mean, I think we are close to a local solution for object behaviors, I guess.
What is the
This-
part that you would want to know more detail about right now?
Yeah, I feel like I haven't been able to really follow this idea of getting, but that's maybe also because I haven't had any more coffee, but.
Okay,
I guess, yeah, my big question is how do we figure out, because a single column cannot see everything, how do we know kind of the sub-region of the
so
object?
let
that
me
is
just,
changing?
let me pop up to 50,000 feet.
Okay,
We've always focused on a single column because I believe single columns have to have complete models of objects. So we have to understand how a single column can understand everything it might observe. That doesn't mean that we can actually make practical systems with a single column. We've shown here that, I felt this even when we're learning the morphology model. This idea that we're going to trace over the whole thing, yeah, it works, but it's kind of slow. And maybe you already got this working in mind, so you can look at it all at once, so a bunch of columns, and they kind of, it somehow seems like the columns have to inform each other, like somehow I have to be able to learn things about a model that I've never observed. Because it just feels like that. I can't prove it, but it feels like the column can't observe everything, but it needs to learn models even though someone else observes something. So there has to be some communication. This becomes even more important when we're dealing with behaviors, because I don't have as much time to do observations. And there's a larger space to observe. It's a 4-dimensional space now, not a 3-dimensional space. It's got time.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for me to build up a concrete model as everything's moving. I can't see all the different changes that are occurring. I'm gonna miss things. So it's really clear that multiple columns are going to somehow get involved in both learning and inferring and predicting. And I don't know how that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I can very straightforwardly imagine voting on behaviors and inferring it quickly by
But-
doing that. If we,
But
we
that's,
assume-
I need more than voting. How do I train in a column? How do I learn something I haven't observed?
why would you not, you mean applying? in
It's
what
like,
situation
I
have you
can't
not observed it?
imagine every column, I mean, columns can vote. But that means, but how do I learn a model? I have trouble imagining every column can observe all parts of a model. It just seems like. And maybe it involves hierarchy, I don't know, it just seems like I don't have enough, somehow models have to inform each other, they have to, I don't know how.
Well, why we assume that for the morphology models,
What do we assume?
that that during learning, the column has seen all.
Yeah, but it has time to do it. We could take all the time in the world, right?
Yeah,
It
you
works,
said
it
that-
can work.
yeah,
And I think it can work, and it can work theoretically in the behavioral models too. If I had a really fast saccade in the signal, and I could sample 100 points a second and move around, I'd catch everything,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But it doesn't
Yeah.
work like that.
yeah.
So theoretically, yes.
Or what you were saying, if we keep looping back the behavior, then technically.
Right, then I
yeah.
play it, we have
Yeah.
again, and we do it,
Right,
which
right.
I think we even have to do even with multiple columns. We have to, like the first time a child sees this thing move, it doesn't
Right.
get it all, then it does it again,
Yeah.
does it again, does it again, it's looking at different parts.
Yeah, yeah,
So maybe, I don't, but I still feel like on the behavioral part, it just seems like I can't sample fast enough to be able to accurately build that model. I mean, in theory, yes, I could do it quickly, or I could do it over and over again, and if I had a perfect time signal, and I had a perfect space signal, and knew exactly where I was at every point in time, I could just sample over and over again and fill in all the pieces of my model, and I get it. It might take days or hours to sample over a complex behavior to get all the points. It doesn't seem like that. It feels, I'm not sure. Here's another,
But
you ever,
I mean, it's not like we don't have a lot of time to learn the behaviors of the world. Like, there are not that many complex behaviors that
Really?
that we can actually model accurately. Or at least we are not, like, when have you last learned a totally new behavior that you couldn't take an existing behavioral model and just apply it?
every time we work on neuroscience, we're trying to learn things that we've never done before, and that's why it's so hard.
But that's more like, that's
would think
still
about
like
That's
conceptual
conceptual
models,
model,
and
yeah.
you don't have to integrate over a large area of many different things moving together.
Well, in some sense, it's
Like
like
I
that.
can imagine learning a simple behavior of like color changing on an app.
Oh,
or
that's
something,
easy,
But
that's easy.
I mean, and even conceptual behaviors seem easier to learn. Like,
Again, if you've
like
got a lot of
this-
parts, if you do, so we need to explain that. If we've already done a lot of, all the components you're learning, and we're just reassembling them in a slightly different way, yes. But the problem we're doing right here, we're trying to learn concepts about the brain. And we don't even have the foundational concepts. It's like we're starting as a child. We don't even understand what neurons do and how this works and that works. And so we're trying to figure out these little basic components and rearrange them a bit and try to rearrange them this way. And every time we read a paper, we're looking at pieces that are in some subsample of the bigger space, right? And you say, oh, can I recognize that from this subsample? No. Then I look at another one. Oh, can I recognize what's going on from this subsample? No. Can I recognize no? And it's like you bang your head against the wall over and over again. And eventually it works. I love those analogies. I think that. I don't know. You know, have you ever seen this, this little trick? There's a bunch of circles on the screen. And there's some like lines through the circles. You look at it. And so what is that? Nothing, right? And then a moment later, the lines move, all of them move. And in different ways. And immediately, you know what it is. And you say, oh, that's a
Yeah,
person walking
yeah.
behind it,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
The orientations of the lines.
It's the orientations and the movements. The real trick is when you can see the lines and they're not moving, you don't know what the hell's going on. But as soon as they move, and you see, oh, that's a person back there. You know, and now I'm looking through a bunch of holes and there's a person. Before that, you're just looking at a bunch of circles of lines, you don't see anything. And then it stops moving again, you can't see it.
yeah.
And so it's like, this is in some sense like, why do I bring this up? This is a subsampling of the behavioral mask for that behavior. Right? You're seeing some pieces of the behavior part, some pieces of the motion, not all of them, but enough that when you actually see how they're moving, it then pops into place. So it's not enough from a feature to recognize morphology, but the subsampling the motion space is sufficient to recognize the behavior and the object that's creating that behavior. Well,
Yeah.
the guys
So this would be re-anchoring in the behavior. Reference
it's
frame.
just all of a
So-
sudden I have enough. It's essentially what I'm getting at here. This is like somehow all this happens instantaneously. And obviously different columns are sampling these things. So they're maybe they're just voting.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe
I
they're
could
just
imagine
voting.
that just happening with voting.
Maybe they're
not
just
behavior,
voting,
it's
maybe
recognition.
they are, maybe that's all it is, but they're
It's
voting from,
Anytime they look at this kind of stuff with MRI, and I don't love fMRI, it's not my favorite measurement technique, but they always point to
what?
a higher cortical region
Well, of course they do.
for structure from motion
I think
kind of stuff.
right,
It's like we do have multiple tiers of higher, we
Because-
don't have just.
right,
B1,
but
you
the
know, I
problem
think
is
that-
FMRI would not show this in a single column and lower down. It just
No,
wouldn't show it.
you
Yeah.
don't see much, but
You
you do see
can't,
something special pop out.
you
know,
can't say,
at a higher
well, first of all,
level.
FMRI is a terrible measurement, as you point out. And second of all, even it's the null result from V1 or something doesn't tell you that it's not happening there. It just says that FMRI can't. So,
No, but we do have all these visual regions, right? I mean,
Right,
what are
right.
the,
Right,
What's
so-
the purpose of,
So we've
have
talked about this,
so many-
Scott. It clearly, in the brain, you learn things top down, top first, and then you can relearn them lower down. But that doesn't mean that knowledge isn't eventually down and lower, and you can't, it doesn't mean we couldn't learn it lower down to begin with.
yeah,
So, those are not incompatible hypotheses. Our hypotheses here are not incompatible with that idea that you learn at the top and move down. We just don't want to focus on that because it's gonna be learned, it's gonna be learned in columns everywhere. And so it doesn't matter, it's easier to think about the low down ones first. I mean, I don't,
I'm just going to lodge my
Yeah.
prediction that certain things like this are going to require hierarchy.
I,
I'm not going to,
so I disagree.
put money on it,
Okay,
but
I disagree.
like certain higher level features.
I think
or,
when we get
you know.
to like multimodal, knowledge built on a lot of previous knowledge, you're right. But it doesn't, the mechanisms themselves, I don't think required, we do not required to have that big hierarchy to understand the basics going on, just like two levels
But
in a hierarchy.
this example itself is, I thought that's with the discs and the lines.
That doesn't require, that's just multiple columns. I mean, Vivian's not even off of voting yet. She said multiple columns.
I thought you were suggesting that it was.
No,
hierarchy.
no, I said multiple
Because-
columns.
When you say not voting, when I think voting, I'm thinking flat.
I
But
think
no, I-
the suggestion is that there's a new mechanism
That
that's
communicates
not even
information.
cortical, as I
No,
understand.
I'm not arguing strongly for this, but
Yeah.
it feels like learning has to be spread. There has to be another horizontal spread besides voting.
Uh-huh.
That's what I'm arguing, right? It just seems like,
But it doesn't necessarily have to be hierarchy.
no, it doesn't have to be hierarchy at all. In fact, I wasn't thinking
Okay.
hierarchy. I was thinking purely, I have this paper I can show it to you because I know it's on my laptop, but they show these motion, they can show this activity that is occurring. You activate a single column, and I mentioned this the other day. And then they activate this essentially to a particular column, and you can see the information flows up and down.
Yeah.
And then it starts spreading horizontally.
Yeah.
Why? Is it voting? These other columns didn't get any input. It's like, and there's a certain pattern which they're like, this spreads here, then this spreads here. It's like, it could be just voting, but there's nothing to vote on in that case, because the other columns aren't getting any input.
Right.
So it's like, are they sharing? What are they sharing? Is it, or what is it? Is it invoking the similar, is an adjacent column saying, I have no input? And this guy says, well, I'm figuring out something. I'll just tell you what I learned, I'll activate the same thing on your column so you can learn the same thing because you're not getting input. So I'll train you on what I learned. So then you might get 8 times faster learning or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And once you have a mechanism like that, then maybe other stuff is happening. I'm just throwing it out. It seems really complicated to do this in one column in a practical way.
I think we call this term, some people call it voting, I think I called it propagating, and then now it's like sharing of some information.
Well,
that
I
is
was-
not voting.
Voting was always about inference. and
Right. Yeah.
I'm not even arguing.
Yeah.
I'm asking or talking about something that's always bothered me that may or may not be a real problem, which is not about inference, but about learning.
Yeah,
That's
hence why he's propagating.
we're propagating, but it's all about learning. It's
Yeah,
not,
propagate, yeah,
it's not just propagating something. It's about, I think it's about training other columns on things they didn't observe
Yeah.
themselves, which would make things much faster.
Yeah.
If you could do it. There is an issue of hierarchy too, for example, like if I have 2 columns and hierarchical and they have different receptive field areas, one's a subset of the other, or something like, well, it would have been like this, like 2 receptive field areas. Maybe there's something going on there too, where even though there's only input here, this guy looks at the whole thing, and maybe it's, we do know it's going to tell these guys they should be looking at this, that they would be inferring the same thing. I don't know. It could be like 2 levels on hierarchy. Maybe it's not even necessary. Maybe, Vivian's playing my role. I would normally argue that you don't need anything else. Just 1 column is sufficient. And maybe so.
maybe it is just slow if it's just one column, maybe we just don't know because we have multiple columns to begin with and
Well,
just don't know how slow it is.
So let's say it's 1 column. What that means, somehow we have to be able to explain how a single column
Right.
would, once it learns this model,
Yeah.
would be able to make predictions about where the stapler head is at different points in time even though it's not tracking that end of the stapler, right? You have to be able to say, oh yeah, at this point in time, it's not like at this point in time, I'm predicting a change here. It's like, oh, at this point in time, the top of the stapler should have moved all the way up to here. I'm gonna make
Yeah.
that prediction.
Yeah.
And that was my point about using the occlusion thing.
Yeah.
Cause I can't track it through that.
Yeah.
There's no way anybody can track it through there. It's like I've lost track of it.
Yeah.
But somehow I still know where it's gonna be, even if I wasn't observing it.
So they're voting on state ID. They would be able to, like a single column that's looking at something that's stationary. And there are a lot of other columns that are looking at the top of the stapler that's moving. Even that column that's looking at the stationary part would know that the top of the stapler is moving because they're voting on state ID.
Wait, are we still voting on states? I
No,
thought
not
we
voting on
we're
states.
just voting on
Right.
object ID
They,
and
you
then.
know, you could argue that you could vote on an instantaneous moment in a state trajectory.
Right, yeah.
Remember, states are now four-dimensional vectors. And so at any point in time, it has some sort of morphology to that state, and you might be able to vote on that, but I don't know about that. All right, I gotta go. Maybe we're worn out.
Yeah.